please feel free to use it. This is how we will communicate throughout the webinar. I do try to make my webinars as interactive as possible. So the goal is for you to try to help me specify the webinar for your specific needs. So can everyone hear me? Please say, yes, we can hear you. Type it in the chat so I can be sure that the audio is working properly. Okay, cool. Cool, so we have the yeses rolling in. So we're going to start in 2 to 3 minutes. I usually give a few extra minutes for the latecomers to show up. In the meantime, I would be very, very happy to hear where you heard about the webinar from, and more importantly, where you are in your GMAT study preparation. Have you taken the exam before? Have you not? When are you planning on taking it or retaking it? And what would you like to get out of today's webinar? As I said, I try to make these webinars as interactive as possible. So the more info you give me about you, the better I can do that. All right, cool. So I see some of you have 5 to 6. Some of you have about a month. Some of you have not specified your time. Today's webinar is about the study plan. So I would like to know how long you have until your exam and how long you have been studying for the exam so far. That is the information most relevant to today's webinar. All right. All right. So it looks like so far the majority of you who have answered on chat have been studying for, let's say, a month or so, and you have about another month left to go. So I do hope you already have your study plan all laid out for you. And what we'll do today is try to focus in on what you need to do in the rest of the remaining time. You know, I can see that some of you are also saying that you're stronger in quant or weaker in verbal and so on and so forth. Feel free to ask any question you would like throughout the webinar, but try to keep your questions focused on the study plan itself. All right, so with that, I think this will officially start the webinar for today. So hi again, everyone. My name is David from examPAL. I will be your host for the webinar for today. As a special bonus to everyone with us here today, then I would just like to announce at the beginning that there is 25% off on any of the GMAT courses that we offer. A link has just appeared in chat, and you are welcome to go check this out after the webinar or later on. So for those of you who are first takers, and a few of you have said that you are first takers in the chat, then this intro is geared mainly for you, but also for people who are retakers or who are in the process of studying for the first time. So what is the GMAT? And how should you even go about studying for the GMAT? For most people, studying for the GMAT is kind of like what this guy on the screen, the poor guy on the screen, is feeling like. It's like you're banging your head up against a bunch of equations and things that you have to remember that you haven't done since school, especially for those of you who've been working for a few years and you're out of school. If you're not native English speakers, it might be banging your head up against a bunch of sentence correction rules that you don't remember all that well. Maybe you never even studied. And honestly, even for native English speakers, learning the sentence correction rules can be a bit of a hassle. And really, the first thing that I want to talk about in this webinar is that what this guy is doing here is just the wrong way to go about studying for the GMAT. This is not how you should be doing it. All right. So examPAL and myself in particular, we are a bunch of teachers, and we've been teaching we've been doing various test prep courses for several decades now. And what we've seen is that teaching the courses in class, like one teacher in front of 40 students, it just doesn't work all that well. And the problem with this type of approach to teaching is that there are many, many different ways to solve every single question. And as a specific teacher standing in front of 40 people, it is very hard for me to adapt my specific teaching style to every single student. All right, this is where private tutors are amazing, and this is where personalized online courses come into play. And some of you said you are studying on GMAT Club, and this is the same sort of thing. So you're only looking for the type of thing that actually works for you. It's very frustrating to just go through and read all the books and try to do it by yourself. The second thing that most people don't realize about test prep, or rather standardized tests ahead of time, is that your main difficulties on these exams is not actually the material. All right, most of the material isn't terribly hard. If you had 5 to 10 minutes for every single question, I could guarantee that you could solve the vast majority of questions, no problems at all. But you don't. You only have 2 minutes per question. And so it isn't enough to sort of know how to go through all of the equations, kind of like this guy is doing here. What you need to do is you need to know how to get to the answer quickly, which is say you need to be able to recognize the concept that the question is asking you about. And this is true both for quant and for verbal. And you need to recognize which of the possible methods you can use to attack the question to get to the solution work best for which questions. And most importantly, you need to realize that not all students, not all minds think similarly. So you need to be focusing in on the methods that work for you. All right. And this is sort of what we do in examPAL. And this is also how I recommend you study for the GMAT in general. And again, the beginning of this webinar is going to be focused on what is the GMAT, how you should study for the GMAT. And what I'm going to try to convince you of in the next couple slides is that the way you do it is by focusing in on the different types of methods with which you can approach questions. And this is what we call cognitive flexibility. All right. This is the ability to look at a question, to realize that you have 4, 5, 6 different ways to approach the question, and then to choose the one that will get you to the solution quickest. All right. And to sort of drive this home, I'm going to put up a question on the board now. And what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to answer the question, and I'd like for you to type the answer into chat. Now, much more interesting to me than the actual answer to the question, because it's not a terribly difficult question. It's maybe, say, a mid-level question. Is how you solved it. So please type in the chat the answer to the question you see on the board. I'll read it aloud in a moment. And more importantly, also type in how you got to that answer. All right, so for every positive x and y, 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y is between 0 and 1, 1 and 1.5, 1.5 and 2, 2 and 3, or 3 and 4. All right, so again, type what you think the answer is into chat. And more importantly, type in how you got to that answer. Sort of what solution tool did you use to solve this question? All right, so we already see 2 different answers. And for all of those of you who aren't responding or just reading along in chat, I do want you to also read along in chat and see what people are writing. All right, so there's a very strong consensus that D is the answer, which is correct. D is the answer. Interestingly, we already have 2 different methods to solve the question. So we have one person who's saying that they substituted. There's another person saying that they broke the numerator into fraction. There's another person saying that they substituted. Are there any other solution methodologies that you can see with which to approach this specific question? And again, the goal of the first part of the webinar is to show you that every question can be solved in different ways and that different people prefer different approaches. So some of the approaches that I'm about to show will look very, very long and intimidating and annoying to some of you and very, very intuitive to others. All right, so it's not enough to just know the material. It is also necessary to figure out how you should be using the material. Random positive values. So we have another person who's doing a sort of substitution. All right, so I'm going to go over a few solutions to this question. The first solution, let's call it the classic textbook type solution. This is maybe what you would see in a high school classroom, what you would expect to be, what teachers would expect that you write during, say, a college exam or a high school exam. Something like the above. And it's something like the person who said that they broke the numerator as 2x plus y plus x. All right. So this is basically equation manipulation. It's a purely formal manipulation of the equation. Instead of 3x plus 2y in the numerator, we can write x plus 2x plus 2y. We can break this into two fractions. So then you have x divided by x plus y plus 2x plus 2y divided by x plus y. This is a fraction plus 2. And therefore, the answer is D. The answer is between 2 and 3. All right. And this is a very, very formal, very algebraic proof of the correctness of answer choice D. Now, most people looking at this sort of thing, especially if you're not a very mathy person, will sort of say, well, I mean, how would I have thought to break up the numerator and denominator into these specific bits, and how would I have known to see that there's a fraction plus 2? And you'd be absolutely right. And this is why the most common tool usually used to solve this question, and it's also the most common one that you guys saw in chat live from your colleagues, is substitution. So instead of trying to play around with the equations, what you can do is you can just pick a number for x and for y. It's usually best to pick the easiest possible numbers that you can. In this case, the equation is meant to be true for every positive x and y. So let's just pick the smallest positive x and y. They're easy to calculate with. This is x equals y equals 1. Then 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y equals 3 plus 2 divided by 1 plus 1. This is 2.5. Therefore, the answer cannot be A, B, C, or E, because 2.5 does not fall in any of those ranges, and the answer has to be D. Now, this specific type of method is a type of method that we call alternative, and it's not actually based on solving the problem, because notice that I didn't prove to you that D is the right answer. Like if I were to change 3 to 5 right now, then you wouldn't know what the right answer is. You'd have to go back and you'd have to redo the calculation again, or you'd have to resubstitute the numbers again. So these types of methods, alternative types of approaches to questions, rely on how you can get to the right answer without actually understanding why that is the correct answer, which is to say without having to fully prove that this is the correct answer. All right, so this is a fundamentally different way to approach GMAT questions. A third fundamentally different type of way to approach GMAT questions is what we like to call the logical approach. And this is sort of to take the bird's eye view of the question, to sort of zoom out, to say, well, the numerator is more than 2 times the denominator, right? Because 2 times the denominator is 2 times x plus y. But it's less than 3 times the denominator, because 3 times the denominator is 3 times x plus y. And therefore, it has to be between 2 and 3. And so these types of methods are usually the fastest types of methods to solve questions. This is the most common way to solve a data sufficiency question. Because in data sufficiency, you don't want to actually have to do all of the calculations. And it can sometimes be rather confusing to try substituting different types of numbers. But you do want to be able to play around with the fundamental principles behind the math in the question. And so far we've been talking about quant, but there are very, very similar types of categories in verbal as well, which rely either on sort of meaning or on the structure or on eliminating answer choices or on grammatical rules and so on and so forth. All right. So all of this part of the webinar so far has been to tell you that there are very, very fundamentally different ways to approach every given question. And it is not enough for you to just learn the material and learn the tactics, learn the various strategies with which to solve questions. You also need to focus on learning the methods that work best for you. So specifically at examPAL, we try to do this as interactively as possible. You should also do this. So if you can find a friend to study with, that's great. For those of you, say you come from GMAT Club and studying on forums, being active, participating, asking questions, and so on, helps the material sink in much, much better. You must have some sort of feedback loop. So it is not enough to just routinely solve thousands and thousands of questions. You also need to pause and ask yourself why you got a question right, why you got a question wrong. Again, at examPAL, this is something that we've built into the system. So we ask you after every question, and then we focus the solution tools and so on for what you've done. But even if you're not studying with us and you're using some other platform, there's something that you must do. So every, say, chunk of 5 questions, every chunk of 10 questions, you solve the questions, you look at the answers, and then you go back to the questions and you ask yourself, if I got this right, what went right? What did I do right? Did I do everything cleanly? Did I write things down? Was I careful in my math, or was I careful in my logic? What did I do right so that I can do it again? And conversely, what did I do wrong? What did I miss so that I can fix it? This is absolutely critical for those of you who are retakers, or for those of you who are approaching the review stage of your studies. Quite a few of you said that you've already been studying for a month or two. So you're at the period where you've probably gone over most of the material. And this is where you're at right now. Sort of reviewing and improving is where you're at. And this is what you must do to improve. All right. Last, again, this is something that we do at examPAL, so we do the heavy lifting for you. Is we take in all this review and so on and so forth, and we suggest a specific solution for you. Ideally, you'll also do this for yourself. Sort of this is awards we've received, and excellent customer rating. Again, for those of you who are still looking for a test prep course, then we do offer a success guarantee. So if you've taken the exam before, then we guarantee a 70-point improvement from your previous official score, or your money back. Cool. So that has been the intro to this webinar, which was mainly about what the GMAT is, how you should prepare for the GMAT, and how you are hopefully already preparing for the GMAT, as many of you are in the midst of preparation. And now we're going to transition into, so someone's saying that the audio isn't all that great. Is that just one person having a problem, or is that everyone having a problem? For the moment, it seems like it's just one person. Yeah, cool. All right, so I'm going to continue. So, so far, we've been talking about what the GMAT is in general. So how you should be studying for the GMAT, and hopefully how you already are studying for the GMAT for those of you who are in the middle of your studies. Now we're going to transition into how to build a large study plan. And this is good for those of you who are just beginning, or for those of you who are, someone said that they took the first GMAT sort of as a practice thing and now are planning to start studying seriously. So this is great for you. And it's also important for those of you who have a month or two left, so you can sort of see where you are in reference to this plan. Cool. So we're going to start off by looking at, like, say, the average John Doe GMAT test taker, who's taking the GMAT the first time. He has a 9-to-5 job. He has strong English skills, so he doesn't have to worry too much about filling in all the vocabulary rules and so on and so forth, but he is working daily. So he can't just sit down and study all day long. And I'm assuming that many of you, if not most of you, are in this position. So, you know, you're out of college, you've been working for a few years, you can't just put everything down and go study for the GMAT. So what do you do? How do you schedule? How do you fit the GMAT into your real life? All right, and so naturally, one of the first questions that you want to ask when building a study plan is how much time will I need to complete the studies? And what we usually recommend is somewhere between 100 and 120 hours, and this is sufficient if you are already with a good level of English. So 100 to 120 hours is enough to go over the material, to do your practice, to do your reviews, and to get to the exam for the first time. But it's not good enough if you're not a native speaker, if you need to put a significant amount of time into improving your English skills. And so we do recommend an extra 30 hours. This is quite a lot, an extra 25%, even an extra 40% time for people who are non-native English speakers. Now, we also recommend that you use a relatively dense study schedule. So we recommend that you try to fit all of these 100 to 120 hours into 6 to 8 weeks. So into a month and a half to 2 months. And this comes to approximately 15 hours a week. Oh, yeah. For those of you who are on your mobile phone, that could be the reason. Please keep in mind that the webinar is recorded and will be sent out via email at the end. I do recommend, of course, that you stay, because then you have the option to actually ask me questions. But if it's really, really bad because you're on your mobile phone, then yeah, it might be worth your while to wait for the recording. Okay, cool. So we recommend that you take a month and a half to 2 months to study in total for the GMAT. And again, this is depending on how available you are for studies, and we'll get into the details in a minute. But the reason that we do this is because what we found is if you try to do it in a much shorter period of time, if you try to condense everything into 4 to 5 weeks, then usually you burn out. It's just too much material, especially if you're taking the exam for the first time. You try to stuff it all into your head, you just get tired. And one of the worst things that can happen to you when you go to the actual exam is that you're not focused, you're a little bit sloppy, and being a little bit sloppy on the GMAT is very, very dangerous. It means a ton of points. Conversely, unless you're extremely busy, then we don't recommend spreading your prep time over more than 2 months. Some people recommend studying for 3 to 4 months. We don't recommend this because what we find is that if you do this, by the time you get to the end of the 3 to 4 month study period, you've forgotten what you've done at the beginning. And you obviously don't want this either. So in our experience, 6 to 8 weeks is a good chunk of time that lets you keep up the pace and sort of get really into the groove of studying. It doesn't wear you out, but it's not so long that you really start to forget stuff. So this is the general recommendation for how much time you need. Okay, so let's break this down into 2 months. Let's look at the 6 to 8 weeks and see what we recommend. Now, I will comment that in general, the stages of studying for the GMAT are more or less the same, no matter if you're doing it in 1 month or 2 months or in 3 months. The difference between the different approaches that I'll show today is how condensed you want to make it. So how many hours per day and how intensive of a study schedule you actually want to develop and maintain. Someone's asking if it's the same for the GRE. We recommend more or less the same things for the GRE, yes. In terms of the broad study plan, because the scope of the material is more or less the same. It's a little bit of a different difficulty level and different other things, but in terms of the broad plan, it's more or less the same, yes. Okay, so what do you need to do in 2 months? So the first 47 days, the first month and a half or so, should be geared to just learning the material. Obviously, ideally, you'll want to do this in a structured course so that someone has made a list of all of the GMAT topics for you. If you're doing it by yourself, then you really want to make sure that you have a nice list of all of the things that you want to go over and more or less what you're going to go over every single week. We recommend to divide topics into 2-day mini schedules. The mini schedule will include just review of the fundamental material. This is basically refreshing material from high school, refreshing vocab, refreshing various sentence correction rules, refreshing how to break down the logic of an argument, this sort of thing on the first day of the mini schedule. And on the second day of the mini schedule, you actually go into practice. All right. So it basically looks like this. So this is how we recommend you divide up your plan for every single section that you study. And as an example, if we're talking about integers, then on day number 1, you could be reviewing number properties, reviewing divisibility, reviewing what happens with even and odd numbers, and so on and so forth. And you'll be making a practical tips list. And this is also why we recommend you use a structured course, because the problem with studying from books or studying from forums is that often you'll see the question, you might see someone teaching the material, but you want to actually have a list of practical tips for how you approach the questions. Remember, we looked at the beginning of the webinar at one example question, and we saw 3 very different ways to solve that question. So these different ways are like practical tips. All right, and this practical tips list and also list of things to memorize is something that you need to build up while you're studying. The second day of the mini schedule for a specific topic, say we're talking about integers and number properties, will be to actually try solving various questions, not just learning the material and sort of practicing specific questions in order to learn the material, but also going a little bit deeper and say trying to really solve a chunk of say 30, 40, 50 questions in a given topic, and reviewing them, as I said before. So every 5 to 10 questions that you solve, 5 hopefully, maybe if you have to start, it's after every single question, you want to stop and you want to see why you got it wrong. You want to look at the wrong answers. You want to see what makes them wrong. You want to see if there are trends in what you've been doing so far that you can fix for the future. And according to this, you update your tips list. And of course, this can extend to another day or 2 if you need it. But this is generally how we recommend you divide every single topic in the quant course. In verbal, this is of course spread out a little bit more because you can break up critical reasoning into different types of questions, break up reading comp into different types of questions, and so on and so forth. Someone's asking in chat, how would you approach the plan if you are 24/7 available? So we'll get to that in a moment. You can basically the answer to you is the answer also to someone who's asking, what do I do if I don't have enough time? It's that you take the schedule that I'm showing you now, and it's not going to change too much. What you're going to change is the intensity. So if I'm suggesting a 2-day topic mini schedule, then later on when we're going to do a 30-month plan, I'm going to say that you do all of this in 1 day. So you do the morning, the just regular studying, and in the afternoon you do the practice or something like that. So it's really a question of how many hours you can stay focused a day. Please keep in mind if you're planning to do some kind of crazy 24/7 binge, that you do not want to wear yourself out. If you get to the exam dead, then you've done nothing. Cool. Again, you want to divide your time, a topic every 2 days. This is something that I haven't mentioned so far that is extremely important to mention, and especially for those of you who are not native English speakers. One of the best ways to improve, this is like a passive way to improve your score, your performance, both in quant and in verbal, is to read. So reading speed has an amazing effect on improving your overall, it's not just reading speed, it's also comprehending speed, but they go together, has an amazing effect on improving your overall performance on the exam. Because if it takes you 15 seconds less to read a question and to understand what the question is asking you, then that's 15 seconds more that you can spend on actually solving the question. This is a huge difference. And so we do recommend that you incorporate daily reading into your schedule. Now, what should you read? Should you be reading novels or booklets or, I don't know, cookbooks? The answer is no. The answer is that the reading that you should be doing every day should be as close to the types of passages you see in reading comprehension as possible. So for example, on our website, in the reading comp section, we have a list of recommended sources of reading material. Generally, these are publications that are sort of written, like we like to call them, like for the intelligent layman. So things like The Economist or The Times or something like this. So they have a good vocabulary. They make sort of nuanced claims and arguments about various types of topics, but they don't use a lot of scientific jargon that you just don't need to know for the GMAT itself. And when you're doing this reading, what you should be focusing in on is not just passively reading, but actively thinking. So in the same way that when you read a reading comprehension passage, you stop to ask yourself, what is the author claiming? What is the main topic of a specific paragraph? In a critical reasoning passage, you might ask yourself, how does one sentence follow from the other? What is a logical claim? So in your daily reading, you should be doing exactly the same thing. So you should be taking your Economist or your Times articles or your National Geographic or Scientific American, whatever you like. If you prefer something more sciencey, you should be breaking it down. You should be thinking while reading. You should be doing active reading. Cool. So this is extremely important to do, again, every single day of your studies. Most importantly, and this again ties into the person in chat who asked about 24/7 studies, make sure you rest. So again, this is not an exam you can cram for. This is an exam that you need to build up towards over time. And one of the things in that buildup is just resting. Cool. So what do you do after you've finished all of your studying? You, of course, need to review. And I've talked about review a little bit before, so let me just sort of pull up the list. What should your review include? And many people go straight to the cats. And I'm going to talk about the cats in a moment, but cats sort of are a topic unto themselves. So first of all, when you're doing review, you'll hopefully by this point have a list of problematic topics. You have sections that you don't know very well. So for example, maybe if we talked about integers before, then the subject and the topic of remainders give you difficulty. You just never understand how to do remainder type questions. Maybe geometry is your Achilles heel. You just don't know what to do with geometry. Maybe you find yourself in sentence correction and you're always guessing. You just look at the answer choices, maybe you get down to the last two and you're always guessing. So you should have a list of topics that you know are problematic. If you're a retaker, then you should have these. You know what? I'll talk about retakers in a moment. For now, let's just talk about taking the exam for the first time. So you've been studying. You have your list of problematic topics. You have all of the summaries and all of the practical tips that you've made up so far. You have a nice big list of all of the mistakes that you've made. And what you should do is you should use the practice steps to sort of the tests to sort of hone these in. And the way I like to think of practice tests is as a general rehearsal for the actual exam. So many people, they think of the practice cats, the official cats, or if you're using other sources than other sources, but the official ones are best. They think of them as measuring devices. So my goal when I'm taking a practice cat is to see if I've hit the 700 mark. It's to see if I've hit the 650 mark. And this is important. This is one reason to take the cat. But honestly, it's a really, really small reason to take the cat. A much more important reason to take the cat is to see how well you've brung everything together. So how well can you maintain focus for the length of time needed to do the actual GMAT? How is your timing overall? Do you have enough timing to finish the section? How is your guessing strategy? Do you know which questions to guess? Or do you tend to get sucked into questions by accident without even noticing? These types, what order should you take the sections in? Is it better for you to do quant than verbal, or is it better for you to do the verbal than the quant? And so knowing all of these and figuring out all of these is something that you cannot do in your regular practice sections when you're just going over, all of the topics in, say, triangles or in, say, fractions and percent and rate and work or whatever it is. This is something that you must have a practice cat for. And therefore, when you do your practice exam, make sure to do it in as close of a way to the actual exam as possible. So if your exam's in the morning, do the practice cat in the morning. If it's in the afternoon, do it in the afternoon. Don't pause the practice exam in the middle. Take only the same breaks that you would have in the real exam. Don't, of course, use phone or any sort of external help. Make sure you're in a quiet environment. And all of this together really, really lets you simulate the GMAT as best as possible so you're not surprised on actual test day. So this is the main thing that you want to do the CAT for. The second most important thing is to relate to all of this, to relate to all of the review topics. And this is to help you hone in. So when you're doing the CAT, maybe you'll figure out that from the list of problematic topics, maybe it's in your best interest to just skip some of them. Maybe questions about, I don't know, regular polygons give you such a headache, or questions about sets give you such a headache, and you spend 2 to 3 minutes on them all of the time, and you usually get them wrong. It's in your best interest to just guess them and skip them and move on. In general, we find that skipping a bunch of questions at the end of the exam, which is to say, if you only have like a minute left for the last 5 to 10 questions, then you're definitely doing it wrong. You should have taken these last 5 questions or so that you only have a minute left for each to solve, and you should have spread them out throughout the exam. And to do this, you use your CATs and you use your problematic topics to identify in advance those questions that you know are going to give you difficulties. And you will skip those if possible. And of course, you should also use your CAT to see how many silly errors you mistake. So for example, how many calculation mistakes. From your mistakes list, you'll see how many of them are actually relevant to the real exam. All right. So you do a practice test, the same time, the same mental space as much as possible as the actual GMAT. Then you take the rest of the day to analyze it. You do one of these, here it says every other day. You can do a bit less if that's too intense for you. You should definitely do at least 2 CATs before your real exam. Better yet is to do 3 or more. But again, don't kill yourself. Make sure you're giving yourself enough time. And this is the main thing that you need to do in the last 10 days. So last 10 days is not about learning new material. It's about really polishing in everything that you know so far. Cool. The last day before the exam, you do absolutely nothing. At most, you can do like an hour or 2 of just, let's call it mental warm-ups, slightly practicing on a few things, but you do not want to mentally exert yourself. Think of yourself as an athlete before a big sporting event. So the last day before your big sporting event, you do not want to tire yourself out. This goes for athletes, it goes for you as well. Cool. So that's basically the overall plan for how to study for the GMAT. If you're a first taker. And the question is, how much of this is relevant to you if you're a retaker? If you've done the exam before, some of you said that you've sort of done it once, maybe a bit casually, but now you're serious. Some of you are maybe just retaking it because you have to. So what do you do differently? So, I mean, obviously, the first thing that you want to do is you want to do it all again, but better. And actually, this is a not so obvious thing to say. And so the first thing to realize about being a retaker, especially if you're in the high range of the GMAT, if you're in, say, the high 600s and you need to get to the 700s, it's that it's not enough to just work on the hard problems. It's not enough to sort of look at the difference between where you are and where you want to get to and just work on that. This can work for the low score range, for, say, the 500s and maybe the low 600s. It doesn't work in the 600s. In the 700s. What you'll need to do is you'll need to repeat the fundamentals. So you'll need to go again over the basic material. In our courses, the intros and lessons. If you're learning from a different course, it's their teaching material, and you need to see what new things you can find in the material that you didn't realize before. Which specific let's call them equations or rules or methodologies did you not understand the first time around because you weren't well versed enough in the material, and you can understand them now because you're going over it again for the second time. And so this is something that obviously you do when you're reviewing as well, but this is doubly important for a retaker. This is the majority of what you will need to do as a retaker, is to repeat the fundamentals in order to improve what you already know. Because if you just do the same thing again and again and again, you're going to get the same results. So you need to change something up. All right, learning from mistakes is basically the same as before. We sort of recommend that you categorize mistakes into 3 broad categories. The first one is I didn't know the material. So for example, this is maybe very common in geometry, where you just didn't remember the right triangle rule. You didn't remember maybe similar triangles. In critical reasoning, it could be you didn't remember exactly how to negate a statement. These sorts of things that you sort of look at a question, and you go, you know what, I just didn't know how to solve that question. So this is definitely a type of mistake that should send you straight back to your textbooks to learn the thing that you didn't know. The second and the most frequent type of mistake on GMAT questions is not of that type. It's of a made the silly mistake kind of mistake. And what are these mistakes? These are, I knew how to solve the question, but I missed a small trap. I forgot to substitute a number. I made a small calculation mistake. I didn't notice a detail. I copied the information wrong. In verbal, a very common type of silly mistake is I answered the wrong question. So a question asks you about, oh, I don't know, blue lizards in the desert, and you accidentally answer about blue lizards in the savannah or something like that. So you make these sorts of mistakes that don't derive from not knowing the material. They derive from working very, very quickly. And again, this goes back to why you need your cats. You need to plan out your time so that you have enough time to answer the questions that you can answer as best as possible. The third type of mistake is is also very, very important for retakers, at least as important as the other ones. It's less important for first timers. It's use the wrong strategy. So if, for example, your biggest problem on the GMAT is timing, and the reason that you're taking such a long time to solve questions is because it's taking you an enormous amount of time to work through all of, say, the equations, or to comprehend the very, very long verbal passages, then you should try approaching those specific types of questions differently. You should try, for example, using less equations and relying more on alternative approaches of using specific numbers. You should try taking long, wordy problems and breaking them down into short, logical chunks instead of trying to comprehend everything at the right time, at the same time. So these types of mistakes really are important for those of you who are retaking or who are towards the exam. It is to recognize when there is a faster way to solve the question. You know how to solve the question, but the way you're doing it isn't good enough. And you need to work on changing it up. All right, so this is the majority of work for retakers. Cool. So we've talked about the sort of the standard plan of action that we recommend for people who have a full 2 months to study. We've talked about what you need to do in general if you're a retaker. Now we can sort of tweak this a little bit and ask, what do we do if you have only 30 days? What do we do if you're extremely busy and you need 3 to 4 months, or if you feel that the 2 months dish isn't enough? And as I said before, this is just basically about taking the same thing that we did before and squeezing it together, or stretching it out. So the big problem with a 30-day study schedule, as we said before, is this basically. This is what you'd look like if you're studying for 30 days. Instead of taking, let's see, I want to go here, excuse me. Instead of taking 2-day topics, instead of taking all of the various mini topics, say integers, triangles, critical reasoning, or mainly the quant topics, honestly, and splitting them into 2 days, you want to condense them into 1 day. So you do your studying in the morning, you do your practicing in the afternoon, you try to go on to a new topic every single day. There are quite a few topics on the GMAT, so you will need to go on to a new topic every single day. This is something that you realize exactly how many days you can spend per topic by making that list at the start. Remember, at the start of the study plan, we said make a nice big list of all of the topics that you need to go over. And then you can sort of see if you have 1 day per topic, 2 days per topic, if you can spread a topic over 3 days, and so on and so forth. Of course, on our platform, we do this for you automatically. So anyways, you squeeze all of the study plan into one very, very long day. You do need to keep reading and working on your memorization and so on in the early mornings when you get up or just before you go to bed. This is really not something you should skip, even if you are trying to squeeze things together. And then in the last 10 days, you try to squeeze in all of the review. Before you maybe had 2 weeks for review, now you're going to have maybe a week or so. But it's the same basic idea. So you're going to take a practice exam. You're going to use a practice exam as a general rehearsal for the big thing. You're going to use it to fine tune problematic topics, practical tips list, and so on and so forth. And then you're going to take a day off just before the actual big day. And then you're going to have the exam. And again, we can look at 90 days. And this is only if you're an extremely busy person. So you're working, say, very long 10 hours, maybe even 11-hour days. Maybe you're busy on the weekends. Maybe you just need a ton of time for English specifically. And then it's similarly, but sort of more spread out. So if before we talked about 2 days, then now you can have 3 days. So you can have 1 day to study a little bit, another day to do practicing, a third day for review. You can spread your review out over longer, and then take a day off and then take the exam as before. Cool. So last the last part of how to build a study plan and what to do in the study plan is a list of additional tips that are relevant for everyone. This doesn't matter if you are studying in a month or if you have 2 to 3 months to go. The first specific tip is that silence is golden. When you're studying for your GMAT, try to make a nice block of isolated time. Take your phone, put it off, put it in a drawer, put it somewhere else, somewhere where it won't bother you. Number two is that if you have trouble grasping something, then sometimes you want to push it to review. If it's just a small subtopic that you don't know now, it's sometimes better to push it for review. But if you identify something that's a fundamental gap, so we gave the example, say, of remainders before and integers. If you just do not understand a specific topic and you're trying to learn it and you're reviewing it, then you do need to pause and you need to go over it. So don't just skip things because they're hard and say, oh, I'll come back to them later, unless it's like an esoteric question, which isn't terribly important. Next big tip, we've talked about this quite a lot today, is that every single mistake you make should be viewed as an opportunity. Learning and preparing for the GMAT is not just about rote practice. It is about actively taking everything that you have learned and are seeing throughout your practice sessions and integrating them back. So it's all about the feedback loops. As I said, get 8 hours of sleep, regular exercise, don't kill yourself. Regular exercise has been proven to improve cognitive function and a bunch of other functions, so it is recommended for everyone. And last but not least is to be optimistic, but to also be realistic. So if you only have a month left and you're 200 points away from your goal, then there's a very, very good chance, almost guarantee, that you will not get to that goal. So you should either sort of think about which specific schools you want to apply to, or you should delay your test date. If you're at 2 weeks before the exam day and you're taking a practice CAT and you see that your practice CAT is 50 points below where you need to be, and you think that another week or two could help you get those 50-point ups, then it might be in your best interest to delay the exam for another week or two, just to let you have that time to arrive at the exam when you're not fully prepared. It's better to be fully prepared for the exam than to sort of throw it out the window, as it were, unless you just want to do it as a, let's call it a small practice session. Cool. I think that's it for today. I'm going to leave sort of the special 25% discount off. There is a link at the top of chat that you can go and check out. We have a Q&A session now. So if you have any specific questions about your own personal study plan, then please feel free to ask and I will do my best to answer. We do have quite a bit of time, so you can also ask any questions that you have that are not directly related to your study plan, and I will do my best to answer them. If there are no questions from chat, then we will close this webinar. And at any rate, thank you very much for those of you who have attended and have listened so far. How many cats do you think are ideal? So I'll be honest, I first read that question and I thought of, like, cats the animal, not cats the exam, which is a funny question. Anyways, how many practice exams do I think are ideal? This depends on the time. Ideally, you want to do all 6, though maybe you should leave 1 or 2 in case you have to do a retake. But don't do them, very, very crunched together in the same amount of time. So what we wrote up above, which is a CAT every other day, is the most dense, the most frequent that you can take these CATs. If you have another 3 weeks for review before the exam and you do 2 CATs a week and you take the time to review them, then that's perfect. If you only have a week or 2 left, then I wouldn't do more than 3 to 4 exams because you just won't have time to go over them properly. So when thinking about how many CATs to take, you should really be asking yourself, do I have enough time to properly review and learn from my CAT? I'm often getting confused in sentence correction and all the grammar stuff. Can you suggest a procedure? Currently, so the first thing I can say is that this is obviously a big topic. I can't teach a sentence correction, in 2 minutes. You should check out our course. We do have instructional material, quite a bit on sentence correction. The basic answer that I can give you is that the most common approach in sentence correction is to go over all of the splits and the answer choices. So look for differences between different answer choices and use them to eliminate the obviously wrong answer choices, and then think about everything else. In sentence correction, you should definitely become acquainted with the common traps. So for example, various switching around the pronoun, dangling modifiers, all these sorts of things. There are some very, very, very common sentence correction traps that once you know them, then at least half of the sentence correction questions you can solve. I think that's all I have time for in this webinar to address, but do check out the content on our course. If I want to apply in round 1, which is about in 4 months, how many times shall I take the exam? So hopefully 1. Obviously, this is the hope of every GMAT test taker. It sort of depends on what score you're aiming for and how good you are, where you are in standardized testing in general. So if you've been like, say, a 700 score all your life in the various tests you've taken, and you need a 700 and something, then there's a very, very good chance that you'll get it in the first go. If you're aiming much, much higher than you usually perform, then you'll probably need to take it twice, maybe even more than twice. You should definitely leave enough time to plan for a retake. So if round 1 is in 4 months, I would recommend starting to study now, so that you can take your first exam in 2 months or so. And if necessary, this will leave you enough time to retake it, and possibly to, hopefully not, but possibly to rethink things, and still leave you enough time for round 2 if necessary. What is the recommended time between taking 2 GMATs? This depends on why you want to retake the exam. So if the reason you got your first GMAT, you got a bad score in your first GMAT, was that you were super stressed out, you had a bad night, and this sort of thing. So it's not some sort of, let's call it, fundamental deficiency in knowing the material. It's just that you had a really bad day for whatever reason. Then the minimum amount of time, so 3 weeks if I remember correctly, and it's actually a bit less. And because that'll keep you as fresh as possible. And then you should use the next week or two to just sort of refocus yourself, recenter yourself, calm down, and so on and so forth, and go take the GMAT when you're still fresh. If the reason you did poorly in the first GMAT is because you just weren't prepared, then you're probably going to need a month, maybe 2 months, to basically go over everything. So when we were talking about retakers, we said that the first thing is that you'll need to relearn everything. And again, this depends on exactly how much you need to improve, why you need to improve. But it's either going to be the minimum amount of time if you just had a really bad day, or it's going to be somewhere between a month to 2 months if you feel you need to seriously work on everything, essentially. Any more questions? When going through topics, would it be better if I focus on the topics that I'm not good at after going through the official guide? So first thing I would like to make a disclaimer about the official guide. We do not recommend the official guide as a primary source of practice, because the explanations there are very often not the explanations you actually want to use to solve the question on the exam. They're long, they're not focused, they're just not good explanations. We do think the official guide is excellent supplementary material. So if you have a structured course which actually teaches you the different solution approaches and methods and so on and so forth, and you feel you don't have enough practice in whichever course that you're using, then you should go to the official guide for additional practice. When going through topics, would it be better if I focus on the topics that I'm not good at? So I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. I'll try to answer it. Tell me if I've got the question right. The general answer is yes, you should shore up your weak points. So if there are topics that you know you're bad at, you should improve on them because this will improve your overall performance. The strategic answer to this question is it really depends on your overall goals for the GMAT. So ideally, if you have a target score, then you'll have a target quant score and a target verbal score. You can just go to the internet and look for a GMAT score calculator to see what specific quant verbal breakdown you need to get to that score. And then you strategically choose which sort of sections you can afford to, let's say, throw out the window or to put minimum time in, and which sections you really, really need to go deep into because you want to be perfect at them. So if there's only 1 or 2 sections that you're not good at in general, and these are like small topics on the actual exam, then you know what? No, there's no point in sort of studying them. If sections that you're not good at are critical for your success so that you get to the score that you want to, then definitely go over them and improve them. I hope that answers the question. Any more questions? Given IR and AR and the essay are not as important, how would you suggest the study plan for that? Honestly, I would basically ignore them. So you need to do an essay or two and submit it to an essay reviewer to see that you're on the right track. You should go over the question types in IR, so you sort of know what to expect. I wouldn't study for them. It's more a luxury than anything else. So if you finished everything and you have extra time, then sure, have fun with the IR and the essays, but definitely don't put in more than say a day or two just to sort of figure out what these are and have to write a few practice essays and so on and so forth. The main thing to remember about the IR and the AWA is that you sort of want to get, let's say, a mid-level score in them. You don't need a good score. You just need that your application doesn't have like a red flag on it. So someone doesn't see that you got I don't know, a 2.0 or a 2.5 in your essay, and they're like, what? That makes no sense. So you want to get like a 4.0 or 4.5 above in the essay. You want to get also like a mid-level IR score, and that's good enough. Would you suggest buying the 4 additional cats from official GMAT website for practice? 100% yes, but this is with the caveat that you have enough time to properly review them. So as I said before, someone asked how many cats should I do? The answer is the exact same here. If you have time to properly do the cats, properly review them, then yes, buy them for sure. They're worth it. Any last questions? I think we have time for 1 or 2 more, after which we will close this webinar. Okay, so I think there are no more questions. So thank you very much for everyone who has attended today. The webinar should be recorded, and an email with a link to the recording should be sent out in the next day or two. There's a 25% off discount for everyone who is here. You can scroll up to the top of the chat to find the link in the chat window. I wish you the best of preparation, the best of GMAT, and remember that the GMAT is just a stepping stone. So what's much more important is that you get into the school you want to go to and you end up on the life path that you want. Much, much more important than GMAT. So best of luck to everyone and have a great day.